In the silence of written words, echoes of lost adventures and buried mysteries lie hidden. Each page of my diary is a gateway to unknown worlds, where horror and wonder intertwine in an intricate dance of darkness and light. Spencer and Molly, a middle-aged couple, lived in a quiet town in Ohio. Married for over 20 years, they had built a peaceful life together. Spencer worked as a high school history teacher, while Molly ran a small bookstore downtown. They had 2 grown children who were away at university. Spencer and Molly's daily routine was marked by regular rhythms: breakfast together, work, dinners with friends, and weekends dedicated to gardening and walks in the park. Their house, a townhouse in a residential neighborhood, was their refuge, the place where they felt safe and protected. One day, a new neighbor moved into the house next door. He was a man in his 40s, well-groomed but reserved in appearance. He introduced himself as David and said he was a computer consultant who worked from home. Spencer and Molly welcomed him warmly, inviting him to dinner to welcome him to the neighborhood. During dinner, David proved to be a friendly and interesting guest. He talked about having lived in different cities for work and expressed his happiness at finally settling down in a quiet place like their town. Spencer and Molly felt comfortable with him and enjoyed his company. In the following weeks, David proved to be a discreet and respectful neighbor. He always greeted Spencer and Molly with a nod when they crossed paths, but never engaged in long conversations. Sometimes the couple noticed lights on in his house until late at night, a sign that he was probably working on his computer projects. One afternoon, while Molly was in the garden pruning roses, she heard a noise coming from David's yard. Curious, she approached the fence and saw the neighbor digging a deep hole. David, noticing her presence, smiled and explained that he was planting a tree. Molly smiled back and went back to her chores without thinking too much about it. A few days later, Spencer noticed that their mailbox had been tampered with. Inside, he found an envelope with no sender containing some photos. The images depicted Spencer and Molly in private moments, having dinner with friends, taking a walk in the park, even sleeping in their bed. Disturbed and worried, Spencer immediately called the police. The investigation led to nothing concrete. There were no fingerprints or useful clues, and none of the neighbors had noticed anything suspicious. However, Spencer and Molly couldn't shake off the feeling of being watched. They started closing the window blinds and obsessively checking the door locks. One evening, while watching a movie in the living room, they heard a noise coming from upstairs. Spencer grabbed a baseball bat and slowly climbed the stairs, his heart pounding. He opened the bedroom door and saw a figure crouched in the corner. He turned on the light and found himself face to face with David, their neighbor. Spencer, furious and frightened, ordered him to leave, threatening to call the police. David, with his hands raised in surrender, tried to explain his presence. He told them he was a former inmate who had served time for a crime he didn't commit. He said he had been framed for identity theft by an unscrupulous colleague and had spent years in prison before proving his innocence. After being released, he struggled to rebuild his life and find a job because of his criminal record. David explained that when he had moved in next to Spencer and Molly, he had hoped to start fresh. However, paranoia and fear of being unjustly accused again had taken over. He had begun obsessively surveilling his neighbors, fearing they might uncover his past and ruin everything. Jane, a 78-year-old elderly lady, lived alone in a quiet suburban house. Her life was marked by a reassuring routine of small daily habits: watering the plants in her beloved garden, baking cakes for her grandchildren who visited her on weekends, and watching her favorite TV shows in the evening. Despite her advanced age, Jane was still in good health and enjoyed taking care of the house independently. One day, while she was busy pruning roses in the garden, she noticed that a new tenant had moved into the neighboring house. The man, in his 50s, seemed like a perfectly normal and decent person. He politely introduced himself to Jane, saying his name was Mark and that he had just moved to town for work. Jane welcomed him with a smile, happy to have a new neighbor to occasionally keep her company. In the following weeks, Jane and Mark exchanged a few words when they crossed paths in the garden or on the street. The man was always kind and helpful, offering to help her carry groceries and asking for gardening advice. There was nothing strange or alarming about his behavior. One evening, however, while she was in bed, Jane heard strange noises coming from Mark's house. They sounded like muffled cries, as if someone was asking for help. The woman got up worried, but then she thought that Mark was probably just watching a movie at high volume. She tried not to pay attention and went back to sleep. From that moment on, almost every night Jane was awakened by those unsettling cries. She began to wonder what was really happening in that house. During the day, Mark appeared calm and smiling, as always, but at night he became the protagonist of a dark mystery. Jane was torn between the desire to investigate and the fear of discovering a terrible truth. One morning, as she went out to throw the garbage, Jane noticed strange stains on Mark's driveway. As she approached, she realized with horror that it was blood. A shiver ran down her spine. What was her neighbor up to? Panicked, she ran back home and called the police, telling them about the nightly noises and now the traces of blood. As law enforcement arrived to search Mark's house, Jane watched the scene from behind the window, her heart in her throat. After an hour, she saw Mark being led out in handcuffs by 2 police officers. The man had a wild expression and a haunted look in his eyes. He was shouting disjointed phrases. Later, Jane learned the chilling truth. Mark was kidnapping stray animals and homeless people to sadistically torture them in the basement. He was a disturbed individual, a sadist who enjoyed inflicting suffering. Those agonizing screams in the night had been his victims. Jane felt frozen. For months, she had lived unaware next to a monster, exchanging smiles and small talk with him. A shiver of pure terror ran through her at the thought of how close she had been to danger without knowing it. From that moment on, she no longer felt safe even in her beloved home. The tranquility of the neighborhood had been shattered, and Jane realized that evil can lurk anywhere, even behind the most innocent of smiles. In a quiet town in Ohio, Calton, a 20-year-old, lived what seemed like a normal life. He resided with his parents in a modest house, attended the local college, and spent his free time with his longtime friends. Calton was reserved but friendly, always ready to help those in need. His daily routine consisted of morning classes, studying in the library in the afternoons, and evenings spent with friends playing video games or watching horror movies, his great passion. Calton had a close relationship with his family, especially with his younger sister Emily, whom he adored and protected like a precious treasure. Calton's life flowed peacefully until a new neighbor moved into the house next door. The man, in his 40s, introduced himself as Jack and seemed friendly and sociable. However, there was something in his gaze that made Calton uneasy, a disturbing shadow he couldn't decipher. As days passed, Calton noticed some oddities in Jack's behavior. He often saw him observing his house from the windows, as if studying the family's habits. Sometimes, as Calton returned home in the evening, he felt like he was being followed, but when he turned around, there was no one there. One afternoon, while Calton was in the garden mowing the lawn, Jack approached the fence and started asking questions about his family, particularly about Emily. Uncomfortable, Calton gave vague answers and walked away with an excuse. From that moment on, he began keeping an eye on Jack, worried about his sister's safety. Things took a disturbing turn when Calton found Emily in tears, saying she had seen Jack watching her from her bedroom window. Furious, Calton confronted Jack, who denied everything with a sinister smile. Calton's parents, while concerned, decided not to take any action, hoping it was just a misunderstanding. However, Calton didn't trust Jack. He began investigating Jack's past, discovering that the man had a criminal record for stalking and assault. Growing increasingly alarmed, Calton installed surveillance cameras around the house and made a habit of accompanying Emily wherever she went. One night, Calton woke up suddenly, hearing noises coming from downstairs. He silently descended the stairs and saw a figure moving in the darkness of the living room. He turned on the light and found himself face to face with Jack, who held a knife in his hand and had a wild look in his eyes. In a panic, Calton managed to disarm Jack and immobilize him until the police arrived. It was discovered that Jack had planned to abduct Emily, obsessed with her resemblance to a girl he had stalked years before. Shaken by the incident, Calton's family decided to move to another city to leave behind that nightmare. Though relieved, Calton remained scarred by the experience, aware that evil can lurk behind the seemingly normal face of a neighbor. From that moment on, Calton became more cautious and distrustful of strangers, always vigilant to protect his loved ones. It has been an honor to share these stories with you. If you wish to continue exploring the dark side of the unknown with us, we invite you to subscribe to our channel and activate the notification bell to not miss any new discovery.